In this series of videos, we're going to do what's called verifying a trig identity. And I'm going to work several examples for you. It's really about figuring out the right way to solve a puzzle. Now, there may be more than one way to solve that puzzle. And so if I do it one way and you maybe could have done it a different way, as long as you can justify and we get the same verification, then that's okay. Something that's very important that we want to point out is that when I'm talking about verifying an identity, that's not the same as just solving an equation. When I verify an identity, I work with one side typically of the equation and I try to verify that I can turn it into the other side. Okay, so adding and subtracting terms, multiplying by the same term, all of those things that you're used to doing when we solve an equation is not going to apply to the verifying. So we're going to come down here and let's look at our first example. I want to, in this first series of examples, what I'm going to do is I'm going to work with one side and try to turn it into the other side. Typically, you try to choose the side that is more complicated. Okay, so because I have both a left and a right, well, which one is more complicated? I want to take the complicated side and turn it into the easy side. So if this is my first example here, the left-hand side tends to be a little bit more complicated. So we're going to work and see if I can rewrite the left-hand side as ultimately what the right-hand side is. Let's start by distributing and getting rid of our parentheses here. So I end up with secant theta sine theta plus secant theta cosine theta. Okay, so I got rid of the parentheses. My goal is to try to get rid of secant and sine and turn them into tangent somehow. Okay, so secant, I can rewrite secant as 1 over cosine using the reciprocal identities. And I'm just going to leave sine theta here. And I can do that here again. I can rewrite secant as 1 over cosine times cosine theta. Now, I hope you recognize that if I were to multiply these two fractions together, I end up with sine over cosine plus cosine over cosine. And sine over cosine is just tangent, and cosine over cosine is just 1. So that is tan theta plus 1. So some of the strategies that you're going to kind of see me using here, number one, try to address the more difficult side, turn it into the easy side. Number two is we tend to go through sine and cosine to get to another function. Okay, we sometimes have to go into cosine and sine in order to turn it into something that ultimately I will use. Let's look at one more example together in this video. Here I have cotangent squared x times tan squared x plus 1 is equal to cosecant squared x. The left-hand side is much more complicated than the right, so we're going to start again on the left. It's not always going to be that case, but for this other example it will. So I'm going to try to see if I can turn all of this into one term, which is cosecant squared x. So before I just jump into distributing this, anytime I see tan squared x plus 1, right, a combination like that, I want to again think about if I have a squared trig function plus 1, I want to start thinking Pythagorean identities. I can rewrite tan squared x plus 1 as secant squared x. Okay, that just simplified it a whole lot for me. Now, how am I going to get cotangent and secant into cosecant? Well, cosecant and sine are reciprocals of each other, so maybe I want to go in that route. So I can rewrite cotangent as cosine squared x over sine squared x, and I can rewrite sine squared x as 1 over cosine squared x. So notice that I went from cotangent and secant and turned it into sine and cosine. Now what that does for me is it allows these diagonal cosines to cancel, leaving me as 1 over sine squared x, and 1 over sine squared x is cosecant, I'll get it, squared x, which is what I was trying to show. So again, that's how you would verify that identity. You can see, as I've stated already, I had to go through sine and cosine to end up getting to cosecant. Now that's not always the case, it's just one strategy that you might be able to apply. So we'll pick up with 2 more examples in the next video.